Yeah, you got it.
Okay, now it's recording. See, ooh, I'm telling you, I put the degree to use. I guess I'm gonna have to edit that out. I forgot that it said it's recording, so I shouldn't have said that. So I guess we're gonna go ahead and start now.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am.
Are you excited to give your research to the world?
No, because I have no confidence yet, but I believe
No,
I'm
you
on
should
to
really
something.
have confidence.
I believe that I'm on to something. So,
No, you are, and that's why like I got so excited. Um, Again, this is class in session where many times I am the professor, but all the times I am the student. And we have Dr. Sarita A. Stevens from Indiana, again, telling us about what is the name of your dissertation title again?
well, my dissertation title is How Culturally Competent School Leadership Can Improve the Outcomes for Black Boys Pre-K 12.
Okay. What if you had to summarize the purpose of your research, what would that be?
Well, we really have to, I think of this modern philosopher named Ron Edmond from the University of Michigan, who says that we have everything that we need to educate all children. It's whether or not we are ready to admit that we don't that's going to make the difference. And Larry Lazat, Ron Edmond died relatively young, but Larry Lazat took up his research on the correlates of effective schools. And so there are seven main correlates, but they've added some to effective schools. And if you do those things for every child, like customize curriculum, keep in touch with home, make sure that you have an aligned curriculum, make sure you have trained people, make sure you have strong leadership that's willing to be honest. You really can make a difference, and you can. Blaming everything on like behaviors and extracting certain children from school too frequently leads to, failure. And unfortunately, it impacts Black males much more often than it impacts other students. And and people are not willing to talk about that out loud. There's plenty of whispering, plenty of research, plenty of blaming the victim, and understand, if you're suspending a child at preschool, they're not even at the age of reason. So
Right.
you're blaming a child that doesn't have the capacity to act like an adult. So we really do have to look at that honestly. Look at that without assigning guilt, uh, because this outcome is locked in a system. And when you're part of a system, it's just like mob mentality. It's only you have to deliberately say that I'm going to step outside this and do something different. Or you will go along with the system that's designed for a specific outcome.
How long did you, how long were you teaching before you actually noticed this, or did you not notice it until you were in administration and was far back enough to,
So that's when I noticed it when I became a principal,
oh,
because there were times where I think that I was asked to be more harsh to certain students, and so I found myself saying, let's talk about this, let's dissect this. And some people weren't able. I mean, it was just too much to for them to endure that they're being assigned blame. When they're not being assigned blame, you actually ask people to, like, let's look at why you want this person completely put out of the learning community. Let's think about that, and let's think about why your mercy for one student is greater than your mercy for the other when it comes to suspensions and separation from school and things like that. So I think that, and when I was in an alternative um, environment, people had the heart to try to help people. So it's a little easier to talk about those situations. It's a little easier to talk about those situations. When you got in a traditional educational environment, people got very pushy about that. And so as a leader, and that goes back to the core list of effective schools, you have to be a strong leader and you have to be willing to not force a courageous conversation, but to initiate a courageous conversation and have people to participate to their ability, to their greatest capacity.
As a teacher, because you said a lot of this occurs in this I guess it wouldn't be oppression to Black boys, but this what would you call what's happening? This dismissal of Black boys disproportionately from the educational process. You said a lot of it is unintentional, or that the teachers don't notice the role that they're playing because it's part of a system. As long as you taught, were you part of it? Did you actually do it and was like, wow, I see I did that, or it was just never a part of your reality?
So now in my dissertation, I talk about this one young man who, is forever on my heart because Michael witnessed his mom kill someone. And he was only 5. And he witnessed that, and it really did affect his developmental stage. So he also was a very dark-skinned, beautiful child. And he felt like he was being targeted or that teachers didn't like him because of his skin tone. Now, and it probably wasn't because of his skin tone, but did race have something to do with it because we had predominantly white staff? Yes. Yes, it did. His senses were probably right on that, which is why you talk to adults and you have honest conversations. Well, eventually, the group of teachers built up a case, and we had to like put him on at home, and that wasn't good for him. He pleaded and said that I need to be around people. And they were so, his grandmother has him, they were so disappointed. And they expressed their disappointment in me. And later on, when I thought about it, and I'm glad they did that because later on, when I thought about it, I'm like, folks, I'm disappointed in me as well. Because we should have done something else for Michael. Because separating him at that point, he was in the 11th grade. I to this day don't know if Michael graduated, but I put him in my dissertation because that's the hard stuff that we have to do. We can't extract students from an educational environment. He had never done anything like threaten to shoot up the school. I mean, generally, though, Black boys don't shoot up schools. So he had never done anything like that. So I don't know. I don't know how eventually I gave in. So anyway, that's on my mind forever. And I say that it is important to have the conversation of what do we need to do that's heroic in making sure that a child gets his diploma, because you know how vital that is. And if a child gets the 11th grade, we can get him to his diploma.
Now, this is what amazed me about you and your research, because for whatever reason, going back through the classical readings of Black literature, right? And I went back through the autobiography of Malcolm X, the Souls of Black Folks, and Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro. And I'm going through it, and I read, which goes right with your story. When a boy comes to a school without knowing his lesson, he should be studied instead of being punished. The boy who does, I don't have my glasses, who does well in the beginning of the year and lags behind near the end of the term should not always be considered or considered a poor student or ridiculed. And it goes on to talk about how look beyond this particular outcome. And of course, in this is the miseducation of the Negro. So he's talking about black how black people are processed in education. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And this is 19.
34, 30, 38.
Yeah, right.
So,
And
okay, so you know what? I don't want to give the impression that the reason this is happening is because white teachers make this happen to black children. Let me spread the the rationale here.
okay.
Black teachers will develop the same negative impression of the failing child or the child that's coming up in poverty, the child whose Maslow's hierarchy of needs have deficiencies. That teachers in general, no matter what race, will tend to have these thoughts or stereotypes about certain group of children. And so the tolerance level is smaller. This is not just, although race does play a part in the assumptions. You know, this is the assumption of this is what I think. As a school administrator, I was amused when a fellow white administrator made some serious assumptions about me. I'm like, now, how are you that skilled where you can assume what I know or what I can do? That's a deficiency. That's not, you need to recognize that's a deficiency because I can tell you right now that you're dead wrong. And if we have a
In what way was he projecting that?
well,
In what
I was actually defending one of my sons. I'm like, you're talking to another principal. It's like, well, I mean, what are you thinking?
mm,
You need to be reasonable because you're talking to someone who knows. So, you can't just assume that I'm going to adopt to your standards, which are not good enough for me. So,
mm,
and so you will start from there. And whatever you can't do, no worries, I can. So I know that those assumptions will get in the way of true conversation or true commitment to making change. But you know what? I want to also go back to um why it is important for us to understand that separation from schooling, especially for younger children, it's devastating because we know by many levels of social psychological research or psychological social research that impacts the development of a child. Even if I use Erik Erickson's psychosocial stages, but I also get some information from Jean Piaget because it's cognitive, and then from Jean Rousseau that explains that everybody is born the same. Everybody's born free. What happens is there is a collapse and a restraint in opportunity and in your social environment, which goes back to Jim Crow and all of those rules and
mm,
regulations
mm,
and laws that were made to suppress people from progressing as fast as others. And so then that was done intentionally. So, but even now, if you say that, some people are like, you're lying, that's a terrible, but it's there on the books. So it's there in the history.
okay, I'm
Uh,
with you on that. Are we talking about? Are you because it seems like there's an ebb and flow in this being about race and it not being about race. Is
Well,
it more about
okay, so it is about race because you can convince you can convince a race of people what their definition is. It's possible. How many times have you heard somebody say that no good in or that,
yeah. Well,
like you look down on, I'm not going to that establishment because, it's so, you can be socialized into looking down on a certain group of people, and it doesn't just have to be black. It could be, now there's this big you know this big you know nose up to foreign, to I don't like to call people aliens because I don't think anybody's an alien,
Right. Now you make a person legal or illegal, but go ahead.
Right. It's like, so we have to stop doing that. I want to talk about like this, like Eric Erickson's social psychological stages and why this is important. So if you think
Why?
about a child in preschool,
Hmm.
um, and I like to do this through stories. There was a daycare. We don't know why they did it. I mean, I need to research that more. Maybe they came up with a reason where they set all the children down. And this is a true story. That's why it's hard to talk about. They served all of the white children their snacks, and they made the black children wait until they decided. And it had four adults in that room that took part in this. And someone blew the whistle. And these are working parents, so they blew the whistle. One of the guys was a working parent, black guy was working. So of course he rushes to the school, and they put it all over the internet. And
Hmm.
so I'm like,
I'm
wow,
listening.
what psychological damage? Because what they ended up doing is they caught these kids. These are preschool kids, right?
Hmm.
And Erickson says that the early childhood is between 1 and 3 years old. So
So
so the
this was just it was this wasn't like
no, this was within 5 years. It was during COVID. It
but
was
this wasn't like we're doing an experiment. This was how they ran their school.
No, they don't know. I mean, this is one day they were saying that this group of kids were bad, and so they lumped all the kids together. This is baloney, baloney. No, any adult that is running a school knows that you can't do that. If you call yourself an educator, now, if you're not, if you're just, you know, babysitting kids, but this was actually a school establishment. So Eric Erickson's the basic conflict is, at that age group is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Right.
Okay.
So what happens at that stage is, you're past the stage of trust, because 0 to 1, you learn to trust the world from the adults around you, because the adults, when they take care of you, you learn to trust the world. But you started developing independence when you're 1 to 3 years old. And you start, generating a little autonomy, like, okay, I don't want to wear this. I want to wear this, even if it's not appropriate. And parents know, okay, I'm going to give them a little wiggle room, versus shame and doubt, or an adult saying, you're a terrible kid. Yeah, and so you sit there and you don't get a snack. And see, kids, that's the language that a child understands. They wouldn't understand anything else. They just know that they're not getting their Cheez-Its, and so that's confirming for them at that important developmental stage that they are not worthy of the Cheez-Its.
Mm.
And so that's why an adult needs to be very, very careful in the way they separate and punish children. You have to make sure that you are being fair and equitable, or else you're gonna manipulate their developmental stage.
Well,
So then, hmm?
that's why I further have a question because you're saying that these are happenings or goings on that are not necessarily purposefully done or purposefully coordinated. But if the person's absence is in the education material, how is there being any critical study of the person to understand their dynamics?
Well, okay,
So
so mhm. So
I can treat you equitably, but it's still
if you have
and
missing information, like you don't understand how critical the developmental stages are, you don't understand how and make no mistake about this, these systems that were developed, they kind of squashed the critical race theory, but that's a very real theory, regardless of whether or not people want to acknowledge it. It's to the benefit of people who benefit from it not to acknowledge it, or to say this doesn't exist. And if you say that it does, I'm going to do something bad to you. I mean, that is the perfect example of a totalitarian environment. But critical race theory is real, because if you had things like Jim Crow laws or systems that constantly told a person, you can't have access to this, you can't have access to that water, you can't have access to that seat, you can't have access to your Cheez-Its and cookies, because of the way that now the good children and the children that are worthy, they can eat their cheeses. So for that's a clear message to a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
A child that's put out of school and knows that they can't go to school and they have to hear from their parent at 3, you're just bad, so that child is going to develop that complex. So by the time they get to the initiative versus guilt stage, they're going to be tiptoeing. They're going to be careful. 3 years old to 6 years old is the initiative stage, where you take the initiative to explore the world. They're going to start tiptoeing. And then when your parents tell you, don't you go up there starting trouble, you stay quiet. Don't you say anything. I've been in classrooms where I've witnessed where they're like, okay, Johnny, okay, be quiet, So, you got to understand what you're doing to a child's developmental stage. That's why an educator has to understand what the psychosocial impact is when you do certain things to certain children.
Isn't the educational structure as blatant in its isolation of particularly Black people, but in this case, we're discussing Black boys, as Jim Crow? The Our history is extremely whitewashed, and that is not an accident. And the outcome of the removal of Black males from the educational process, it's like we come up with these accidents when all through society it's systematic. So why do we think that?
No, the systems are deliberate. I don't think the systems are by accident. The systems are deliberate.
How
But
can the teachers not know it then? That's my question.
well, how can they not know that? First of all, this okay, so the system of funneling people into dropouts happens because even when you separate a child from school for one suspension, for one, that reduces their chance of graduating by 50%. If it's not somebody on the other side that says, come here, Johnny, come here, sit down. Let's you and I write out a plan, because you are worth it and you are worth your diploma. Let's write out a plan. Let me explain to you, young man, your diploma, or young lady, your diploma is the difference between you making $10 to $15 an hour to $15 to $20 an hour. I want you to add that up for 30 years. I used to do that one-on-one with these students. I'm like, I want you to add it up. Use your phone, or try to do the long math. And when they added up, they were like, oh my God. I'm like, yes. Yes. So every year you add value to your life when you got that diploma in your hand. So you can't let people talk you out of that. So also a part of the system is poverty increases your chances of not graduating. So if you're facing suspension, poverty, people that just don't have a tolerance for you. Now, I can say that public education is more aware of alternative pathways now. So they're trying to keep a child in school at an alternative facility, which, that's okay, as long as they're getting something to move them to graduation. Now, should they be in an alternative setting forever? No, no. What it is to help them develop out of that. You help them develop out of that and have them go back to the general population.
Let me read this caption from, well, it's not a caption. Let me read this portion of a paragraph from the Miseducation of the Negro. In our schools, attention should be given to the study of the Negro as he developed during antebellum period by showing to what extent the remote culture and was determined by ideas which the Negro brought with him from Africa. To take it for granted that the antebellum Negro was an ignoramus, or that prejudiced writers have said so, does not show the attitude of scholarship. And the Negro students who direct their courses accordingly will never be able to grapple with the social problems presented today.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting that you're saying antebellum, that period. Do you mind like giving some background to the audience? So,
Yeah. The antebellum is before the Civil War. That's what that period is. And there has always been an absence of Black folks and their reality in American history, American society. Just like they say, oh, they went and kidnapped slaves. Um, we're gonna have to stop and do part two in a minute. We had to, and when we come back and do part two, you can answer this. Um, at this time in 1930s, he's saying, let's talk about the history of these people and how they function. So you'll have an understanding of who it is that you're working with. And so there can be some pride in the group that is being educated as opposed to everything constructively being done by one race that's not them. And everything that is not done or is the follower being them. I'm saying, A, do you find that to be heavily present? Because even if there is an understanding or cultural competency happens, I let you stay in the school. We are, okay, we're in the school, we're doing good. But even then, there's an absence of your contribution, your presence.
no, okay, so it's funny we bring up antebellum, and people need to know the difference. Real, first of all, we haven't been free as a group of people longer than we were enslaved. We were enslaved for 400 years. So in 1935, I can imagine that Black people are just out of slavery for 60 years. So you have people that were behind the trap of it being illegal for you to learn to read and write. That was
Right.
on purpose so that you can be driven as a machine for labor. So there's a reason. Now there are some correlations now between having the undereducated and the industry worker, because they just want to drive the human machine. And so you really don't want intellect to interfere with that
Right.
labor, with that
It,
manual labor
now
part of
that's
it.
broad public education. That was a
Uh-huh.
statement of John D. Rockefeller
So
to make workers and not thinkers.
So that applies to us because we were the free labor and it was illegal for us to learn to read and write. And so I would imagine that there was a divide between the people that were born into the privilege of reading and writing and being educated, which is why during the Reconstruction period, the formerly enslaved people were doing well progressively. It wasn't until 1918 that they had to reverse it through Jim Crow because they saw that. They saw what happens, when you start having a level of education that's efficient.
I gotta give you a little pushback on that
Okay.
because you got to remember we're under at this point number one. Jim Crow started 60 years before 1918.
Well,
That's
I
number
mean,
one.
it became a law in around I
Ah,
think
no,
13.
no, no. Um, we're under Plessy at this point, so
Mm,
we are deep in the decline of like Black people did really well the first 50 years after. Well, that's really well as comparative to
mhm.
slavery and
And
the
black people did
racism.
okay under Jim Crow because segregation ended up, isolating our
It kept the
genius.
Black dollar in the Black
Right.
community.
And it isolated our genius. And then
But
even when that was discovered.
we have to understand we were under the Plessy decision. This was constitutionally based segregation enforced by the federal government until 1965. So we weren't citizens until 1965. So we are in
Citizens with the right to vote. You mean
What's that?
why are you saying we weren't citizens, or is it because we didn't have the right to vote in
No,
some
because
states?
you have to understand the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voters' Rights Act is a restatement of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, equal protection under the law, no slavery, and the ability to vote. Well, we know for 100 years that did not happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was not until 64 and 65 that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment had even had any teeth in it. That's why Malcolm X was saying, we have the laws on the books. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. So this appeal for laws to allow Black folks to do something, we've ignored the laws that we need for 100 years.
Right,
So,
right.
so that's what I'm saying.
But
At
do
this
you
point,
see how a system can interfere with the implementation of a law or the effective implementation of law? What you do is you put a system there that will either deadlock it or slow it down. I mean,
yes,
even if you read that book, oh God, it's called Cast. Oh God,
yes,
I can't think of
yes.
her
You told me
name.
about that book.
But it's excellent because it talks about how the Nazis used the Jim Crow laws to write, a portion of their manifesto
Well, heck
for,
yeah.
to so,
Yes,
so
a lot
that
of
that part was
Hitler's
amazing.
yeah, a lot of
Hmm.
Hitler's activity was based on how the United States dealt with the Native American.
Hmm.
Now, here's here's the um here's the deal with that. Uh, at this point in the turn of the century is when the miseducation of the Negro is happening. We still have this absence of presence, contribution, and value in American education. As you know, being a university professor, I'm teaching how I'm seeing how American history is being represented in who's there, who's not. It's still
Hmm.
misogynistic. It's still color coded. It's still
Now
um,
that's what I would attribute that. I also want to give major kudos to Woodson for, emphasizing how important it is to include, the contributions of Black people into history. Now he did it by, saying, okay, we need to implement Black history. We need to, well, I don't really think it's Black, I think it's American history. I think that when the things that even the man who did the cotton gin, when you bring up the cotton gin, you automatically say Whitley.
right.
Like he was the person that did it. And
There were
you almost
cotton
don't even
gins.
know who the
There
other
were
guy
cotton
is.
gins in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. So
He he actually, which it was 9 times out of 10 somebody who owned them because the person who does the work is the person who's going to figure out how to make it
well,
easier.
they should have, the man should have been proud enough of his slave to at least name his slave. But yeah, I know, I know. But
There
okay,
is
so
a saying.
even,
There is a saying that the only invention the European made was the patent office
well, okay.
because
So,
it was the
even
people
the
doing the
man,
work.
even the African that told them the art of inoculations, they cast it off as witch doctory and all of that stuff. And eventually they had to use it. But, even, George Washington Carver, it is just, I thank the Lord that I went to Iowa State University for undergrad. I would have never known that man's true contributions. They need to stop calling him the peanut man. He literally formulated some of the first bio car fuel. His thoughts were that you did not have to use petroleum. So that man was freaking genius. But
Well,
but it was
we got a minute and a half, and then we're going to
okay.
stop, and then we're going to pick up and
Okay, so
continue.
I also want to get back to the developmental stages because we're
That's what we're going to
actually
start with.
we got all of the wrongs on trial right now.
But as far as Carver and the plant based fuel, you understand the Ford plant.
Yeah, that's the
That's where they
commercial.
built the cars. Ever thought about why they call it the plant where they built it? Where they built? Why would you call a place where you put cars together a plant?
Well, he was a fan of George Washington Carver. Now he
No,
still
he
has
was
to be limited.
he told him how plants develop along a particular
Mhm.
way.
But
And
when I
that
say
was
he was a
why the
fan, he still didn't get past the racism, but he was
oh
a
no, no,
fan.
no, no. They definitely weren't friends. But what I'm saying is he used him in
Right,
his explanation of the assembly line.
right.
And that's why it so that's why he kept
Which is acknowledgement of his genius. They just don't name him. They don't put his name in there.
I don't I'm not gonna give him that much credit
Mhm.
because his name is nowhere around it, but no one ever put together why they called that a plant. That was why that goes back to
But I'm
uh
gonna tell
George
you with
Washington
less than a
College.
minute. Let me tell you
But
how this.
no, no, we